Okay, we now begin Chapter 11. We're reading from The Rape of the Mind by Just A. Merleau, M.D. Mental Contagion and Mass Delusion. During disturbed times such as these, the thoughts of everyone follow the diplomatic play going on at the various political conferences. It would be worthwhile to investigate whether it is possible for leaders of nations to arrive at a common understanding as a result of mutual exchange of words, ideas, and the negotiating of treaties. Yet, the various cultures in the world and the different ideologies not only speak different languages, but even their ways of thinking are different. Unobtrusively, our personal past and our cultural environment creep into our thinking habits. Our feelings and thoughts are conditioned and coerced by various social influences. It is already possible to bring to the surface some of the illusions and prejudices people have about one another. We may say that the special environments in which people develop and the habits they build up foster subtle illusions and delusions in persons of which they are, for the most part, unaware. Through research in the field, anthropology and psychology have been able to compare different ideologies in people by observing the growth of the wholesome and unwholesome in the child, in groups, in tribes, and lastly in nations. The findings call to our attention the difficult art of argument in situations where there is scarcely any common ground of communication and understanding. In a study on mental coercion, we have to trace some of these mass psychological influences which condition our attitude in life. The affirmation of my own errors. The lie I tell 10 times gradually becomes a half-truth to me, and as I continue to tell my half-truth to others, it becomes my cherished delusion. We rediscover this phenomenon every day in that huge laboratory of human relations we call psychological counseling and psychotherapy. Let us look at just one example, the case of a perfectly healthy child who decides one day that she doesn't want to go to school because schoolwork seems so very difficult. So she tells her mother that she has a headache, and mother agrees to let her stay home. Thus the girl avoids the schoolwork she dreads and gets the additional gratification of her mother's solicitous and tender nursing. The next time our little girl wants to stay home, it is easier to pretend she has a headache, and the third time it is easier still. Gradually the girl herself begins to believe in her recurrent illness. Her conscience bothered her the first time she lied, but by now her initial lie has become an ingenuous truth to her. By the time our heroine becomes a grown woman, she will have to consult with a doctor about her constantly recurring headaches. Doctor and patient will have to spend many hours untangling the web of half-lies, innuendos, and self-pitying complaints until the patient rediscovers that her headaches all began on that one day she didn't want to go to school. Delusional headaches afflict the world itself. Political demagoguery is, to some extent, a problem in our country. The particular form of this demagoguery takes, the particular form this demagoguery takes is only a passing phase, and when our current dragons and inner phantoms have been laid to rest, the eternal demagogue may arise anew. He will accuse others of conspiracy in order to prove his own importance. He will try to intimidate those who are neither so iron-fisted nor so hot-headed as he, and temporarily he will drag some people into the web of his delusions. Perhaps he will wear a mantle of martyrdom to arouse the tears of the weak-hearted. With his emotionalism and suspicion, he will shatter the trust of citizens in one another. His delusions of grandeur will infect those insecure souls who hope that some of his dictatorial glamour will rub off on them. Unfortunately, the problem of delusion has been studied almost exclusively in terms of its pathological manifestations. The psychiatrist who has encountered delusions of grandeur in his patients has in the past lacked the philosophical and sociological background necessary to enable him to form comparisons between his patients' delusional systems and mass delusion in the world. In dealing with patients suffering from megalomania or persecution mania, he has tended to rely too much on hypotheses which explain pathological delusions as the product of anatomical changes in the individual brain. He has not given enough attention to the question of whether or not these phenomena are in any way related to an abnormal way of thinking in a physically normal person. Since the growth of anthropology and the social sciences in the last decades, new light has been thrown on the subject of mass feelings and mass delusion. Obviously, these are not phenomena which a pathologist can examine under a microscope. They demand a knowledge of history and social psychology and of all the studies which concern interhuman relations and man's collective thinking. To arrive at a clinical stage of study of this subject, it is necessary to divest oneself of various fixed philosophical ideas which have dominated scientific thought since Aristotle. There is, for example, the doctrine of the identity of all thinking processes and the possible universality of human understanding. This is essentially founded on the belief that all human beings think in the same way, but against this hypothesis is the observable truth that philosophers themselves have the utmost difficulty in reaching mutual understanding. This may be largely due to the fact that different men have different methods and standards of thinking. For centuries, science has adopted the Aristotelian dictum that most thought is carried on according to the established rules of logic, which apply in the same way as the laws of nature. It was the philosopher Francis Bacon who first pointed out in his theory of idols that although the laws of logic and clear thinking certainly exist, men may or may not make use of them. Depending on the emotional circumstances, thoughts are often the theatrical curtains to conceal personal passions and reactions. In this statement, the philosopher who lived during Shakespeare's time might almost be attacking the seeming logic of modern demagoguery. Since the Renaissance, therefore, it has been acknowledged that human feelings and personal inclinations mold and direct thought, and this point of view rather early found its most moving expression in the words of Spinoza and Pascal. When we come into contact with the phenomena of collective passion and mass delusion, it is impossible to keep modern psychology out of the picture whether we look at it philosophically or politically. For when examining this problem, we are immediately confronted with the question, do these disquieting phenomena in group life, which lead to so much mutual misunderstanding, arise from the fact that the group is in a particular immature and adolescent phase of psychological and political development? It will be illuminating and may help us answer the question if we study briefly the history of the growth of consciousness and awareness in the individual mind as it passes through successive stages from infancy to maturity, since we can in fact find a parallel between such stages of growth in the individual and the human group. And I know it's a little bit short, but I'm going to stop right there because this ends this section. And we are going to pick this up in the next video. We are in chapter 11 of The Ray for the Mind by Juste and Merlou, MD. And I'll see you all in the next video.